Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday. Hooray, it's Friday. Yeah, woo. Oh, we need some sort of like crazy morning zoo sound effect. It's Friday, August 23rd. August 23rd, woo. I guess there's nothing in particular that's super interesting about August 23rd, but it is August 23rd, and it is August 23rd, 2019, and that's actually the important part of the announcement. Just so you know, you're not listening to a rerun of the show, unless, of course, it is not currently August 23rd, 2019 when you hear this. Although I guess it doesn't cover everything. You could be listening to the podcast a day late. Look, I don't have to tell you everything, do I? I think you're a pretty smart audience. Okay, I'm getting myself tied up in knots here, and there's really no reason to. It's a hell of a day. Let me tell you this. It's a Friday, August 23rd, 2019 that David Koch will never see. I can tell you that. I take no particular glee in the fact that he is dead. Just regular, I think, glee will probably be enough. The morning has... we've already seen the various, sometimes interesting, sometimes not, counterintuitive takes on the David Koch death. Just usually, a couple of don't celebrate, don't be dancing around looking like liberals going crazy over David Koch's death. I don't think there's any reason to go crazy over it. Nothing in particular is going to change. All the damage has been done. But then there were some interesting takes. Let's see, Mark Sumner this morning saying he actually, if I'll paraphrase his tweet about it, that he's a little sad when billionaires die because it kind of proves that there's no miracle drug out there that will extend you unlimited life that will eventually come down in price and be available to regular middle-class schlubs like us. And I guess that's something to think about. I saw Amanda Marcotte, I think, this morning saying it actually disappoints her when climate denialists die without seeing the damage that they've caused to the earth, and they don't live to see all of the problems that they've caused. Okay, they're interesting. I think they all have valid points. Anyway, Daily Coast Radio is live now, and David Koch is not, I guess is the way we'll have to put it this morning. Bill tweets me all the way from Portland, Maine. I don't think he's taken any gratuitous shots at the now dead David Koch. He's dead. Turns out we're still in doubt about Donald Trump, by the way. I still maintain that he died back on July 4th or so, and right around the parade time, and no one has bothered to tell us, and they've been using some sort of weird body double. How they got that hair, I'll never know. Maybe they just removed it from the corpse when the time was right. But okay, Daily Coast Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, not David Koch, assures you that Jared and Ivanka are in complete control. Everything is fine, and you may go about your business. Update, the Washington Post just gave this claim 1,000 Pinocchios. Yes, the bottomless Pinocchio. I remember they came out with that one. Okay, let's see. I'm going to have to check in on the family is texting back and forth here. Just a little bit. Okay. Trying to keep up with things that no. All right. I think everything's under control. But just had to keep an eye on the situation there. The phone just started lighting up with notices. I didn't know whether it was people complaining about the David Koch stuff or not. Anyway, yeah, Jared and Ivanka. It's Friday. I made a note of that in the Morning Post today. Just thinking back to the olden days when we used to believe for the first couple of weeks of Trump's term of office that Jared and Ivanka were in the White House. I mean, there was no other explanation for why they were in the White House. I guess we hadn't yet firmly convinced ourselves that they were just there to steal everything that wasn't nailed down. Now we know why they're there. But at the time, we thought, oh, maybe they had been brought in as caretakers for the doddering old fool that had allegedly become president of the United States, and they would keep a check on his worst impulses. But when Friday rolled around, The Friday news dumps were a, breeding ground for, they're always a breeding ground for crazy, stupid trial balloons and weird things, bad news, etc. But Friday afternoons, Jared and Ivanka, being allegedly practicing Orthodox Jews, were not likely to be around, as they would be making preparations for Shabbat on Friday evening and then into Saturday, and that might be Donald Trump's unsupervised time. As it turns out, it made no difference because he was never supervised, and Jared and Ivanka were never there to do anything in particular anyway, except, I guess, to plant stories with the press that they were privately appalled about everything else that the president was doing, even if they weren't, or even if they were personally profiting from them. So, I don't know. We'll find out as time goes on, I guess, exactly how ineffective they really were. But I was just sort of thinking back to that time, that it made no difference. Monday through Thursday was no different from Friday and Saturday, and it made no difference at all. And also, we have had people question whether or not anyone has ever seen Jared and Ivanka making their way to temple for Shabbat services, and I guess no one ever has, and I suppose they think it's out of bounds to double check on that. All right. One day that'll all come out. Plenty of stories to review for today. Plenty of other things to get to. New developments, old things we haven't gotten to, things that are breaking news, things that are just breaking the rest of us, whether it's news or not. Oh, look. Dang. Something that was probably important. Oh, yeah, there it is. Shows up in Pocket as the Washington Post "Sorry, we can't find what you're looking for" page, which is weird. But the story opens up, so that's good news. Speaking of Jared and Ivanka, hinted at this thing the other day, thought I would make mention of it during the course of the show. American Oversight, the, what would we call them? What sort of genre do we put? They're not really a watchdog group per se. I guess that's how they cast themselves, but they're Democratic Research Group. How do they describe themselves? Look at their about page. Is this one of the? I can't remember where this is. One of the outgrowths of Center for American Progress, or what? Okay. Oh well, Melanie Sloan, I see, is the senior advisor on the team there at American Oversight. She used to be at CREW. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. So maybe they do sort of consider themselves a watchdog group rather than, for instance, a overtly Democratic research group or opposition research or what have you, or tracking for candidates, etc. They're not doing any tracking at the moment, but okay. So maybe that's not their deal. Anyway, okay, forget who's on the crew. From CREW at American Oversight. The fact is, that's whose story we're reading. New lawsuit in investigation of Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner's use of military transport was what I was interested in. It's actually a fairly old story. Only came to my attention about a week ago. Haven't really read through it, just sort of hinted at it. Here's the deal. American Oversight today sued the Trump administration to determine whether and to what extent the president's daughter and son-in-law invited Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin on trips so they could travel on Air Force planes. This story dates back to August 1st, actually, in case you're wondering on what date was this lawsuit filed and how much progress, if any, has it made. We hinted at it the other day when I was talking to Greg, so this probably would have been Wednesday, I would guess. Or maybe it was Joan that we were talking to, trying to think of how it came up. But that they had made, it may have been Joan, that they had made a trip, I think, with Mick Mulvaney. Is that right? I'm pretty sure I now recall Joan's voice telling me about this one. And I wondered whether this was another one of their schemes to get away with free travel. Pardon me. Froggy morning today. Well, lower temperatures today all of a sudden from out of nowhere. I guess summer's over. I don't know whether that's going to make things worse or not. Anyway, according to reports from the New York Times, which is a big famous newspaper, and author and journalist Vicky Ward, whose name was coming up most recently, I think, in connection with the Jeffrey Epstein story. Anyway, was she publishing in the New York Times? Or was the New York Times also covering things? Oh, we'll let you clear that up by reading the links on your own. Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner regularly requested to fly on Air Force planes even when their presence was unnecessary or inappropriate. When isn't it? I mean, at best, they're senior White House advisors and everything, but I mean, those kinds of advisors don't get independent Air Force plane travel when they're traveling, outside of the scope of their duties to the president. And this president includes them on trips far more frequently than previous presidents ever taken their own senior White House advisors with them. I imagine they fairly frequently go on trips, but they're not a prominent part of things, and they never occupy the president's seat at G20 meetings or anything like that. Or anyway. Apparently, when they can't convince the president to take them somewhere, or he wants to go play golf and they want to go somewhere, they are constantly trying to wheedle free luxury private, not private, but rather public, but private aviation style flights wherever they're going on Air Force planes. They want to fly in luxury. They want to fly with security. I mean, we all do, but very few of us can just simply steal that from the government. They're not supposed to be able to, but they're doing it anyway because grifters and thieves. That's the way they live their lives. And they happen to have a powerful ally in the White House who allows them to do it, even though that also isn't supposed to be able to happen. So here's what's going on. According to Ward, that's Vicky Ward, the journalist, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson rejected many of these requests, prompting the couple to invite cabinet officials along, often Mnuchin. In other words, they asked for Air Force planes. Apparently, that decision rests in the hands of the Secretary of State, or at least in the instances in which they wanted to do this traveling, it seems to have rested in his hands. He rejected it because, no, we don't just give Air Force planes to White House aides to fly around on the weekends or whenever for vacations or even for official trips, really. If a White House aide has an official duty somewhere, anywhere, that requires a plane flight, if they're not traveling, if they don't happen to be traveling with the president who's going there, then they're just handed a commercial airline ticket. See you later. But these are very important and very wealthy people who like luxury. And I guess there's the excuse of, well, one of them is the president's daughter, and she, by virtue of that, and of course executive order of the president, is quote unquote entitled to Secret Service protection. And so there's I guess an additional concern there. But of course, you can have Secret Service protection on a commercial airline flight as well. Also, don't forget these, a-holes are supposed to be fabulously wealthy. They have their own private planes or can access private planes when needed. They can simply lease them. Actually, they're not even that costly, but it's out of their pocket, so they don't want to do it because they want to stay as rich as possible. So they just rip off the government for these flights instead. And I guess Rex Tillerson was attacked by conscience at some point and said, I can't approve these flights because it's really against the rules and it's a ripoff of the taxpayer and you're not entitled to it and it's just a waste of money. You're only doing this to live high on the hog. I thought you were able to live high on the hog all by yourselves because you were wealthy, but you're liars or grifters or both. So no is the answer. And they quickly discovered that, one of the cabinet secretaries would be able to do this. Steve Mnuchin, barely able to, but I in some instances, high-ranking cabinet officials, when they insist that they absolutely, positively must maintain a secure connection to the White House for communications because they're super vital to national security, there is an argument for sending them on their trips on Air Force planes for that reason. Steve Mnuchin early on won that argument, maintained, and by the way, consider this, right? This is considered a major national security issue, that if there were a nuclear war, the president of the United States would immediately need to talk to Steve Mnuchin about what to do about this war. And I mean, in a normal situation, the Secretary of the Treasury, I guess, would have a valid national security role to play. They're high-ranking officials. They handle important stuff. But, in this administration, A, it's Steve Mnuchin, and B, he doesn't handle anything. He just sort of sits around and steals gold bars from Fort Knox, which is what he decided to do during the eclipse. Of course, that time for national security, I got to go down and view the eclipse on an Air Force plane and also have myself photographed for whatever reason, just handling gold bars because, that's what I do as Secretary of the Treasury. Anyway, he was an easy mark. He, too, loves living high on the hog and jetting around in secure Air Force planes to wherever he's going. And I guess he was an easy mark. So Jared and Ivanka would say, all right, we want to go, to the Hamptons, and we want to take an Air Force jet, and we can't do it because we're not high-ranking people. Call Steve Mnuchin. He's allegedly a billionaire. He loves to hang out in the Hamptons for the weekend. We'll call him and ask him if he'll tell Rex Tillerson that he absolutely, positively, for national security, has to hang out in the Hamptons this weekend. And if that works, then he'll fly with us. We'll all go to the Hamptons and we'll get an Air Force jet to do it, or skiing in Vail, or whatever their destination was. Even if they had to go to something quasi-official, like the UN needs, quote unquote, Ivanka to give a speech in Zurich. Okay, fine. Commercial flight to Zurich. Are you crazy? Pay for the private flight myself. Are you crazy? I need an Air Force jet. Can't get one. Steve, how about Zurich this weekend? Okay. And they're on their way. In April, back to the article, American Oversight filed a Freedom of Information Act request for communications from Mnuchin and the couple related to their presence on military aircraft, including invitations for Mnuchin to accompany them. The Treasury Department's failure to provide records in response to the request has prompted today's lawsuit. In other words, they're evading oversight and ignoring not subpoenas, but FOIA requests, which are not, don't rise to the level of subpoena, but they should have been subpoenaed on this by now. Not that it would have made any difference. American Oversight has been investigating the Trump administration officials' high-priced travel at taxpayer expense. Remember that we saw a few officials end up having to resign, even from this administration, over their inappropriate use of high-priced travel arrangements at taxpayer expense. From the use of chartered planes for official travel to the use of military aircraft for personal use. In 2017, Tom Price resigned as Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's probably glad he's out of there now. Imagine escaping that early from the Trump administration and not ending up in jail. That's a pretty good deal. So 2017, he was out after it was revealed he'd spent tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars on government chartered jets. And later that year, Mnuchin took a military jet to see the solar eclipse. As the official roles of Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner in the White House remain murky, whether and how the couple has taken advantage of public service remains just as important to clarify. Members of the first family have consistently used the trappings of the White House as personal status symbols, said Austin Evers, executive director of American Oversight. Whether they are inserting themselves into meetings with world leaders, that would be Ivanka, or seeking joy rides on military vehicles, the public has a right to know if Jared and Ivanka are abusing their proximity to power for personal satisfaction. Just ask their friends. They will tell you how privately appalled Jared and Ivanka are at Jared and Ivanka's behavior, and that will confirm the story. American Oversight's complaint is embedded in the story via Scribd. It is American Oversight v. U.S. Department of the Treasury. And, hey, it looks pretty exciting. We won't read all the way through it, even though it's only 6 pages. I think we got the gist of it. Although, I guess essentially we just spent time reading, a press release on the air as though it were a news story. It may have led to news stories, though, because that's what press releases are designed to do. And I didn't see those, but I had this. So okay. Important caveat, we're reading somebody's press release, but I am inclined to believe them. So we'll pretend that makes it okay. All right, let's see. Moving on to other subjects here. What have we got in pocket that would make a good diversion for the morning heading into our first break? Let's see. This is an interesting one. Let's just throw this one in there. I just happened to see, I think, some folks retweeting this one, and it was an interesting piece here from the Orlando Sun-Sentinel, Palm Beach County news section. Scathing. Palm Beach County is really a hotbed of horrible activity, but this is of a different kind. Scathing report: school guards got shoddy training. Who could possibly have predicted that? But it reminded me of a couple other stories that we may ramble into perhaps after the break. All right, let's see. Here is one is credit for the story. David Fleshler and Lois K. Solomon for the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. I don't know if that's like the new name of the Orlando Sun-Sentinel or whether that's I don't think it's a separate publication. But anyway, sounds like it comes under their umbrella. Florida experts will know for sure. Piece begins with a screenshot of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office's interoffice memorandum about this subject. Let's just dive straight into the article. A company that trained armed guards for Palm Beach County schools. Are schools, public schools in Florida, particularly sensitive about school shootings for some reason? I'm not sure. Well, they used unqualified instructors. They passed students who failed shooting tests and committed several other violations, according to a report by the county sheriff's office. Invictus Security Services of Boynton Beach, in case you were wondering who did this, charged $3,000 per person to the Palm Beach County School District to train nearly 30 guards for charter schools under state requirements adopted after the Parkland school shooting. This is the response. They ripped people off. I mean, that's pretty gross, right? I mean, what could be more disgusting? Perhaps stealing 9/11 relief funds in the wake of the attack. Well, Donald Trump did that. Sneaking onto the dais of a pediatric AIDS fundraiser as though you were a big donor, displacing someone who actually was, and claiming credit for having given them money. Sure, Donald Trump has also done that. Well, the sheriff's office review found the training so deficient that it would not certify the guards as qualified, requiring that they be retrained. The head of the state commission investigating the Parkland shooting called the report scathing. Here are the highlights, if that's what you can call them. Some bullet points here. Some instructors lacked state-required qualifications. The program director and lead instructor, Gregory Solowski, was not a state-certified instructor. He, quote, resigned/retired in lieu of separation for violating agency/training center policy from the Lauderhill Police Department, according to the report. So, in other words, he worked for the Lauderhill Police Department, and rather than fire him, he was allowed to resign/retire. Students passed firearms qualifications with an 80% score, rather than the required 85%. The company lacked documentation to show instructors' qualifications, and the company could not document student attendance. I consider this report scathing, said Bob Gualtieri, maybe. Anyway, he's the chairman of the state commission investigating the Parkland shooting, which had been highly critical of Palm Beach County for using a private firm for training rather than a sheriff's office. It demonstrates incompetence, complete contravention of the statute. It's appalling. It is rather appalling, isn't it? By the way, I thought privatization was always better, et cetera, et cetera. That obviously we knew was never the case, but that's important. Complete contravention of the statute. The important thing I really wanted to bring up about this, although I may continue with the reading of the article on the other side of the break, is that it reminded me very much of a story that's now several years old, but I remember, I don't know, let's say probably around 2015 or so, reading the story of a concealed carry trainer in the St. Louis area who was falsifying training documents and, giving people fake paperwork with which they were able to obtain their concealed carry licenses that stated that they had completed the state required training for being a concealed carrier at the time in the state of Missouri. And often in cases where it was literally impossible for that training to have been completed in enough time, that's how they got busted. They showed up looking for their concealed carry permit the day they, quote unquote, graduated from the training. It was supposed to be 8 hours of training, and the class had only begun 2 or 3 hours earlier, and they were there with a certificate saying they had completed the class. That's how they got busted. It was that brazen. Anyway, it reminds me of that. It also reminds me of the fact that, and nobody ever did anything about it. Only on this show did we make a big deal out of the fact that the Utah grade school teacher who accidentally shot herself in the bathroom of the school so many years ago, I think that was probably 2014 or so, she had, prior to accidentally shooting herself, repeatedly violated the rules about concealed carry in the classroom, and everybody knew it, and nothing was ever done about it. It was, they were supposed to have taken the gun away from her, and that's just something that no one's ever going to do. No one's ever going to take, the gun rights people who pass these laws are never going to disarm anybody. They're pro-gun to begin with, and that's really the point. Every time a legislature passes a rule about things like a law about things like this, keep in mind they never intend to enforce the so-called safety protocols that are supposed to make people who are worried about it feel better. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, let's see. We have another dropout from the presidential race, I guess. Seth Moulton, I forgot that he was running for president, and I guess that's probably why he dropped out. So congratulations to him for that, I guess. I don't know. The end. That's the end of the story, honestly. So, yes, we were in the middle of the Sun Sentinel story about more fake training going on in Palm Beach County in the school system. All of the carriers that they were going to place in the charter schools, apparently, in the county, have had their credentials called into question, and I'm sure no one really cares very much about that because it's only children, and, we don't care about them. And if we did, we wouldn't be doing the things we were doing. By the way, I think I saw also, speaking of not caring about doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, if I recall correctly, this might have been last night or perhaps the day before that I retweeted the story of a Michigan school. This is it was offered up as here's where we are as a country in the wake of all the school shootings. We're so crazy in our response to school shootings that we have reached the stage where the story was of a Michigan school, newly constructed high school in Michigan, which was designed architecturally with school shootings in mind. And I mean, it's not a terrible idea at this point if you're building a new school to give that some consideration. Because even with any solution you care to name, there is always the risk that somebody gets through, whether your solution is 100% gun confiscation. As the gun nuts love to point out, crazy people get weapons, guns or otherwise, from time to time. So, all right, fine. I'm okay with the design idea. It's just an indicator of how many places will go out of our way rather than address a more obvious and more direct solution. Here's the tweet I found just a day or so ago. A new high school built in Michigan has pre-planned places to hide in case of mass shooting and curved hallways with large cement blocks to obscure sight lines. Schools designed with mass shootings in mind. The U.S. is rotting from the inside out, said Christian Christensen. Seriously, that's the name of the person. He is a professor of journalism at Stockholm University, having graduated himself from the University of Texas at Austin. I am finding out from his Twitter bio. So, interesting observation, to say the least. Let me open that up so I have that to share with all of you when we do our summary. Okay, so back to the scathing report from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. What's appalling to me, said, I think we're still reading from Bob Galtieri, chairman of the state commission investigating the Parkland shooting. What's most appalling is the school district paid $3,000 per person for this inadequate, inferior training that was, it looks like, just done to check a box and get people through. This said Galtieri, who is sheriff of Pinellas County and chairman of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission. If the school district put these unqualified people into schools to protect kids, people who couldn't even qualify on the firearms under standards that are established, that could be very dangerous. You think? Invictus officials did not respond to calls or emails. They were just busy stealing money. The 144-hour course. Now, you can just picture it, right, in the state legislature. Don't worry, you're all worried that there'll be gun accidents or whatever. You read the gun fail stories. And there are dozens in my collection about school security officers and other security officers and police officers and military personnel who have just had gun accidents. There's even a pretty fair amount about simply school resource officers only who have accidentally fired their weapons on school grounds. It does happen. And with, unsettling frequency. Not the majority of school resource officers by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot, too many. So you can imagine these legislators debating these things. We want to put, 1,000 guns, we want to tape guns to every finger of every teacher in the state. Well, that's just stupid. There'll be accidents. Don't worry. We're going to require a 144-hour course for everybody who wants to be able to carry weapons in the school. And, okay, well, geez, that sounds like a lot. And I'm sure at no point during the discussion does anybody say, question, what happens if people say, 144 hours, that's stupid. I don't need any hours. Won't you just sign this that says I did 144 hours and let me have the gun? And what if people begin to say yes to that? And, that's stupid. It says right here we require it. And then, in reality, we don't. Just sort of pointing that out. Like we said, there was the Utah teacher. You weren't ever allowed to show that you had a gun. It had to be remain concealed at all times. It had to remain on your person at all times. It couldn't be seen in the classroom, but all the kids had seen it 100 times already. And they just let it keep going because in this pro-gun environment where these things are permitted, who's going to suggest, we need to disarm this teacher? And then, you know what? Pro-gun parents would complain. What? My kid's in a classroom without a gun? We can't do that. This is a violation of the Second Amendment, or my kid's not going to be safe anymore, even though he was unsafe because these were safety protocols and she couldn't abide by them. How do I know that those are safety protocols? Well, when you violate them repeatedly, you end up shooting yourself by accident in the bathroom. So I think that, it's arguable they have some correlation here. But the thing is, she violated it time and time again, and everybody knew it, and nobody ever suggested taking her gun away or sending her even to retraining. They just let it keep going until she shot herself. And, similarly in St. Louis, were any of the permits revoked? No, you can't blame people for this bad instructor. But then those people have made a mistake too, particularly some of those people who knew that they were pursuing their certification from this person because it was fraudulent. So maybe, I think at the time they considered pulling some of these permits. I don't know whether they ever got around to it. All right, back to the actual article that has, maybe some provable facts in it. The 144-hour course required by the state Guardian program concentrated on firearms training with additional instruction in tactics, active shooting scenarios, and legal issues. It also involved psychological testing. The company had trained 15 guards for the district and was in the process of training 12 more. That's $3,000 apiece. That's good money. Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, another member of the Stoneman Douglas Commission, blasted the school board for hiring the firm. It's total, absolute incompetence, he said, and they have wasted literally tens of thousands of taxpayers' dollars, and they still didn't appropriately comply with the law. I am outraged at their incompetence and lack of care and concern. A pop-up has gotten in our way. That's much more important. Despite the refusal of the sheriff's office to certify the guards, Palm Beach County's charter schools are not going unprotected. The school district has paid for sheriff's deputies at the charter schools for the first 60 days of school. So the schools will be covered as the guardians get retrained. This was a contingency plan. The pop-ups, really. I can't believe that these things are coming up right in the middle. And this one covers the entire screen. Whew. They have no respect for podcasters out there, I'm telling you. This was a contingency plan in case there was a problem with the guardian. So there was a backup plan. In case all of our guardians are inadequately trained or fake trained, the sheriff's office will step in and put deputies at the schools for 60 days. Anyway, they missed the point that we had all our schools covered on the first day of school. School Board Chairman Frank Barbieri Jr. said. And everything has moved again because a new pop-up has come. They said they understood how we could have misinterpreted the statute. Who said that? We thought what we were doing was authorized by statute. What? I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. This is the school board chairman? All right. Edward Tierney, school district chief of staff, said he's not sure how much it will cost because he's not sure how much more training the sheriff decided the guardians need. He said he asked and didn't get a clear answer on Wednesday. And, it shouldn't, by rights, it shouldn't cost anything because they should be able to get all their damn money back, but they'll have to sue to get that, and that'll take years. So, yes, there will be an upfront cost for retraining their guards if they even bother to go with the same group. I don't know whether that's worth doing or not, or whether they should start all over again and recruit different people entirely. All right, let's get this pop-up mess out of my face. And I got an idea. How about this one? We have thankfully, contribution from our good friend Eric Posman, who I think is in Orlando. I do have that right? I think in the introduction of all of his pieces, he says, this is Eric in Orlando. Of course, he might not be in Orlando right now, or that could be, he might consider that a handle of sorts, and maybe he's moved to the outskirts of Orlando. I don't know. Anyway, Eric Posman has a entry for us, and will give us a 5-minute rest here as well, and clear the frog out of the throat, and organize for the rest of the show, all the great things. Plus, you'll learn something fantastic as a result of having played the piece. Okay, what Eric's working on here is, like any good strategist, he is concerned about the state of the United States Senate and has decided to take it upon himself. And I'll let him explain his motivation for it, although I bet you can guess it. And decides that the Senate races coming up in 2020 are each worth an individual look. And he'll start out here, for reasons he'll explain to you, with South Carolina. Eric, please, if you will.
Good morning, David. It's Eric in Orlando. The news cycle of 2019 seems to be very much in the rinse-repeat mode. The media is playing running bases between a presidency gone mad and the demolition derby in the field that's trying to replace him. We can't turn away from car crashes, right? Meanwhile, outside the occasional Moscow Mitch hashtag, the need to flip the Senate is getting very little play. Our outrage is constantly being stoked by the occupant of the White House, and we ping-pong to play survivor with the Democratic field, many of whom could be better served, and better serve us, by jumping into the Senate races themselves. So I'd like to focus on an alternate task, with a series of Senate snippets. I know that's a lot of alliteration for anxious activists, but the idea is to drill down on all the key races we'll need for our scorecard in 2020. Alphabetically, we'd start with Alabama, and I have plenty on Alabama, but there's still too many dominoes to fall on the GOP side in the primary. Instead, we'll stay in the SEC and look at the prospects in South Carolina. Now, South Carolina has always had an outsized political footprint for the nation at large, mostly because of its status as an early primary state. But there are a lot of other quirks. It's one of those odd setups like Wisconsin or Texas, where the state capital, Columbia, is traditionally occupied by a Republican governor but surrounded by the liberal presence of the leading state university. But in South Carolina, it's the other state university, Clemson, that is actually the leader, having won 2 of the last 3 college football national championships. Football is the other religion in the Palmetto State, so it would probably come as no surprise that there's a pregame prayer before football games involving either public university. There's also a significant military presence in South Carolina, whether it's the Blue Angels doing their air show in Beaufort or all the Marines-to-be stationed at Parris Island. As I drove through South Carolina recently, I only saw one 2020 presidential candidate on billboards. And it's not who you think. The sign read, Tulsi 2020, a soldier's heart. Recent South Carolina politicos have become household names for various reasons. There's Mark Sanford, Jim DeMint, Mick Mulvaney, Trey Gowdy, and Nikki Haley. You might remember Joe Wilson as the congressman who blurted out, "You lie," during a 2009 Barack Obama speech in front of a joint session. He's been reelected 5 times since then. Tim Scott is the only black Republican in the Senate, and soon to be the only black Republican in Congress. On the Democratic side, one of the lesser-known freshmen in Congress is 37-year-old Joe Cunningham, who flipped South Carolina's 1st district after the president threw Mark Sanford to the wolves. And of course there's the elder statesman Jim Clyburn, a familiar face in the House leadership for quite some time. So there's the backdrop for South Carolina's political landscape, and now we get to focus on our man of the hour, Lindsey Graham. Graham elevated from his House seat to take over Strom Thurmond's Senate seat in the 2002 midterm election. He managed to hold off Obama headwinds in 2008 and then cruised to re-election in 2014 by 15 points. As a quote-unquote mainstream Republican, Graham had excellent timing as he managed to avoid the Tea Party wave of insurgent primaries and became the type of GOPer that, while an unabashed hawk, seemed to be earnest and amenable to deal-making with the other side. But the events of 2016 and beyond have reshaped Graham, or maybe turned him into what he's always been, a run-of-the-mill gimme-tarian. Graham went from being a Republican senator that wouldn't endorse Trump to a golf buddy and apologist. Even Trump's continued post-mortem abuse of Graham's bestie, John McCain, hasn't soured him. Graham obviously saw the writing on the wall and had a decision to make. He could A, retire a la Corker and Flake, B, maintain his identity and be a piñata for Trump in the base and get primaried, or worse, as a single man. Rumors have swirled for years about his personal life. So he chose C, go full flunky. And what do you know? Graham put on an indignant show at the Kavanaugh hearings that may well have tipped the scales when the Supreme Court nominee seemed to be circling the drain. Now he's the chair of the Senate Judiciary, and his partisan bona fides are not in dispute. But does it leave him vulnerable in this climate to a general election challenge? It would also be interesting to see how close Graham stays to Trump once the general approaches. Graham's Democratic opponent will almost assuredly be former South Carolina Party Chair Jamie Harrison. That's spelled Jaime, in case you want to donate. Harrison is 43, black, and born and raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina, the home of historically black South Carolina State University. Yet he went to Yale and then to Georgetown Law. He made some brief rounds on the national stage following the 2016 election as a contender for DNC chair. It was the same campaign that brought some prominence to South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, but both fell short and the job went to Tom Perez. Harrison seems to be in a good spot, at least as good a spot as he can be. He has high name recognition in his home state, and while he's going against an incumbent, he's going to get to tie him to a highly unpopular president in a presidential election year. Harrison's active on Twitter with his Send Lindsay Home hashtag. He's done a thorough job categorizing Graham's position changes since Trump has taken office and how they hurt South Carolinians. That he's not the same Lindsey Graham y'all voted for before. Expect Harrison to be much more of a player when the South Carolina primary comes around in early 2020. Hopefully this essay will have aired by then. So there's the first installment in the Senate Snippet series. Hopefully much more to come. Thanks, David, and back to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
Yes, okay, well, back to us. Yes, the segment will have aired by then. What kind of comment is that? All right, I think probably more than once, I guess, at this point, Eric has submitted pieces that have waited either a considerable amount of time to be aired. This is true. I sometimes get distracted by, the crazy president, or occasionally by Senate races. This does happen. Or maybe there might even be a few that didn't air at all, not because they weren't worthy of time on the air, but again, because I lost track of time on days when I intended to play them, and then the relevance faded a little bit, and I just kind of got into my own groove doing things. I apologize for anything that may have happened there, and that's probably happened to more than just Eric. From time to time, contributions are submitted that just don't make it on the air for whatever reason, and rarely is it, or if ever, is it because the pieces are not worthy of airtime or inappropriate or whatever. It's mostly because I find other things going on and get distracted and forget that these things are waiting in the wings. I have a pretty full queue as it is, but I apologize, and I appreciate every contribution that is made. If for no other reason, although there are plenty of others in reality, if for no other reason than it gives me a break on the air, it's much, much appreciated. And really, honestly, who wants to hear my voice all the time, every day, especially when there are so many smart listeners out there who have so much to share? As a matter of fact, I do need to turn some attention back to a suggestion from another listener that might make it easier for all of you to contribute, even in tiny ways, and operate as a pretty good substitute for operating open phones during the show. There wouldn't be the same back and forth that you can get with phone calls, but it would enable brief comments and the like from listeners along the way, and we'll see if we can't integrate the technology at some point soon and integrate the commenting into the flow of the show. All right. As I said, a million different directions we can go in. Don't know exactly how we're going to approach all of these things. The one big issue that may deserve a thorough read-through of an article, we will perhaps save for the next segment so that we're able to do it uninterrupted. Let me make sure that that's open and stays open. So maybe we can do a couple of quick hits before the next break. One interesting one, I thought, real quick, was a Daniel Dale tweet from the other day, back on August 13th. He's referring back to one of his own tweets here. On August 13th, making a speech to, I don't remember who, Daniel Dale notes that Trump says, looking at the media in the room, there's a lot of people back there for like an 11 o'clock speech. It is, or was at the time, 2:40 p.m. And I noticed that when it went out, didn't make much note of it, but then Daniel Dale the other day tweeted out this old tweet from the 13th and said, I looked to see if Trump had ever made a false claim about the time of day before and found this quote from Spy magazine in 1991. And listeners of the show will find it familiar. And so it's a familiar quote. We've discussed it on the air, but it was attributed differently. I actually heard it from my father, who had heard it from another New York area lawyer, and I don't know whether this lawyer claimed to have overheard this himself or whether he had made the comment himself or my dad was confused about the provenance of the quote. But anyway, I think I came to understand that my dad's friend or acquaintance had said this thing about Trump, but in Spy magazine in 1991, it is attributed to a mobster instead. So it may very well be that this friend of my dad's had either read it in Spy magazine and repeated it, and my dad remembered it from back in 1991 as he said it. That could be it. Or this mobster could be a lawyer. That's also a possibility. And he did say it and then later told Spy magazine the same. I don't know. But this is the quote that says, well, the Spy magazine quote from 1991 says, a mobster who knew Trump socially said of him once, quote, he'd lie to you about what time of day it is just for the practice. You remember, that's one of my favorite Trump quotes. And then I was very interested to see Daniel Dale not only bringing it up, but having found it in Spy magazine in 1991, the font of much ridicule for Donald Trump. And probably the staff of Spy magazine were among the most shocked and surprised people in the world. Around November of 2016, I would think. All right, other quick hits that we might be able to fit in before moving into the break. We haven't discussed and probably don't really need to spend a great deal of time on the last planned confrontation between the Proud Boys and the anti-fascist folks in Portland, Oregon over last weekend. I say planned confrontation because that's exactly what it is. This is a piece that makes that point. Andy Campbell writing in HuffPost, Proud Boys leader admits their rallies are for fighting and wasting money. The group brawls with Antifa under the guise of free speech, but video exposes its true intentions, violence, obviously, and wasting public resources. Get this. The Proud Boys for years have helped organize street fights in Portland, Oregon, gatherings thinly veiled as political freedom rallies in order to secure permits or police escorts from the city. This week, that veil was lifted as the group's leader admitted the ugly and obvious truth. The events are staged with the intention of spurring fights, wasting city resources, that's a new one, and winning a game of optics against their anti-fascist nemesis. We've wasted all their effing resources to make this rally, Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio said in a video captured during the latest extremist rally held Saturday in Portland. We want them to waste $2 million and we'll do it again in 2 months. Tarrio and fellow Proud Boys leader Joe Biggs flew to Portland from Florida to host the rally, and fears among city officials about the potential chaos caused them to warn local businesses to close for the day. Meanwhile, a multi-jurisdictional police force of 700 was deployed, according to the Oregonian. The closures cost local restaurants and other businesses an estimated $3 million in revenue, and taxpayers will likely be on the hook for millions more due to the police response, the paper reported. Fewer violent clashes broke out than in previous iterations of the rally, in part because police spent the day escorting and defending, yes, the Proud Boys and members of their local punch-happy cousin, the Patriot Prayer. But the Proud Boys were also keenly aware that the nation was watching. President Donald Trump tweeted just before the rally began that he would be on the lookout for violence committed by anti-fascists in order to designate Antifa an organization of terror, whatever that's supposed to mean. As the rally kicked off, Tarrio was caught on video ordering his gang members to forego the fighting. On this day, nobody would be earning their 4th degree, a rank given to those Proud Boys who assault anti-fascists. This is a pure optics operation. Optics, everybody. Tarrio said in front of a group of Proud Boys, if you're looking for 4th degrees, this is not the event to do it, which is problematic all by itself. Rather than attack protesters, as they've planned to do in the past, Proud Boys retreated across the Willamette River and left the city, announcing on their way out a new campaign to waste Portland's time and revenue, an apparent political maneuver aimed at Mayor Ted Wheeler. The gathering was never about bringing carnage or violence to the city of Portland. It was about financially crippling the progressive hotbed until they take action against Antifa, the gang said in a press release. This appears to be the first public admission by the Proud Boys that the group's aim is to hobble Wheeler's administration. The mayor has allowed these rallies to go on in the name of free speech, despite acknowledging that violence is often the only item on the agenda. It's unclear whether the newfound transparency will have any impact on future demonstrations. In response to HuffPost, Wheeler decried Tarrio's statement, but didn't say whether he'd allow the group to continue to host the events in Portland. He should not. I have one clear message to anyone who says they're going to continue wasting the city's resources over and over again. Stop wasting our time. Stop wasting taxpayer dollars. Stop hurting our businesses. We have a city to run and lives to lead, he said. Although Tarrio on the video mentions another rally planned for October, no city permits have been issued as yet for such a gathering. I have a feeling that it was an ad hoc idea that they came up with on the fly once they realized that they weren't going to be able to fight as they wanted to. And I mean, I could understand it. I think they could probably make it an overt goal from this point on, but I think they were just backfilling, coming up with a reason for being there in the first place. And once they read about how much money was being spent on their stupid rally to protect them from attack, if that's what's going on, they thought that they might as well latch onto that and use that as an excuse for this and any future rally. I've always been surprised. I've never really, I don't know what the legal situation is, but I've always been surprised that police in that city and others are so willing to allow people to gather for free speech rallies in armor and carrying weapons. And I mean, part of the deal has been that the Proud Boys in particular have tried to be very clever in disguising their weapons. That is, telling people that, to fly flags, but fly them off of baseball bats so that the flags could be immediately discarded and the baseball bats could be used as weapons. I think some of the older people from Patriot Prayer are carrying canes, and not because they have a problem walking, but because they intend to pick them up and use them as weapons. Who knows what else? Anyway, we'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just a quick break to organize for the next hour of the show. There's a big and somewhat lengthy article in the Washington Post that needs our attention, and I'll bring it to your attention. It has perturbed Brian Beutler to no end, and with good reason, and me too, and probably a lot of you as well. And if you haven't heard it, here it goes. It's going to be tough is the start of the headline. That's a quote from somebody. I don't know if it's attributed. It's going to be tough. House Democrats appear, ready for this, less likely to get Trump's tax returns before the 2020 election. Oh, no. That deserves, at the very least, a sad trombone. Which we really have to find a new recording of and get rid of that little sting in the middle of it. Okay. It's going to be tough. House Democrats appear less likely to get those tax returns before 2020, which is amazing because in 2015, we knew we weren't getting them. And in 5 years, despite having won back control of the House of Representatives, we're not going to end up with these tax returns. It's rather amazing. And we'll have to, then we're going to get a test of whether or not California's new law denying Trump ballot access is going to hold up. Interesting. Amazing that we couldn't resolve this. Jeff Stein, Rachel Bade, is it how she pronounces B-A-D-E, and Jacqueline Ailmany. You tell me how she pronounces it. It's spelled like Ailmany. Like how many ales would you like? Many. A-L-E-M-A-N-Y. Ailmany? I don't have any idea. Oh, I'm sorry, Jacqueline. But, if we had a producer, I would insist that he give me pronunciations of all these things ahead of time. House Democrats. House Democrats? I don't know. Have I got that? Housey Democrats appear increasingly unlikely to secure President Trump's tax returns before the 2020 presidential election. Duh. According to interviews with legal experts and several lawmakers, as resistance from the Trump administration, can you believe it, has stymied the party's efforts to obtain his personal financial records. Mistake right off the bat. It's not the party's efforts to obtain his personal financial records. It is the goddamn Congress of the United States, the House of Representatives at a minimum. And Jeff, Rachel, Jacqueline, don't attribute this to party activity. Yes, they are Democrats. But as you note right in the beginning, first two words of your piece, House Democrats. House Democrats. The House is being stymied, not the party. Don't make that mistake again. Several Democrats involved in oversight, including Representative his son, I guess, is that right? Daniel Kildee of Michigan, of the Ways and Means Committee, see a long path to getting a final court decision, even if they expect to win in the end. By the way, once again, let me state going into this, they see a long path in getting a final court decision, even if they expect to win in the end. Remember, they're litigating a black and white statute that says, in no uncertain terms, that the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is entitled to this information, period, as a matter of law. They're now saying, we don't know, the courts might not decide, it's going to take a long time. But and to top it all off, the chairman of the committee has been dragging his feet since forever. That's the real issue here. But it's a scandal that there's even a question and needs to be settled in court. And the fact that it's taken so long to even get to the point where you're supposed to be able to find out that there was never a question in the first place is a scandal all by itself. Okay. So that's what Kildee has to say. Trevor McFadden, a Trump-appointed judge who was assigned to the case in July, will hear the case first, and any decision is likely to be appealed to higher courts up to the Supreme Court. This despite the fact that the law is clear. But when we get to the gray areas of constitutional law, and every area is a gray area in constitutional law, yes, the statute says this in black and white, but there will have to be arguments over, is the statute constitutional despite what it says? Arguments will be offered on that. So yeah, it could take a long time, even though, in the main, this never becomes an issue because you never have to pry tax returns out of a sitting president or even a presidential candidate because they offer them up voluntarily because they understand the value to the voters of being able to tell whether or not their president or potential president is on the take. But okay, that's out the window because everything's out the window. LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. For it to be resolved by fall 2020, and there's an election coming up in the fall of 2020, would amount to Democrats drawing a possible but improbable legal perfect straight, according to Harry Sandick, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. House Ways and Means Committee Chair Richard Neal, Democrat of Massachusetts, wake up, Massachusetts, whose panel is leading the pursuit of Trump's returns, has also thus far opted not to pursue Trump's state returns, despite a new law in New York giving them the authority to do so. Neal has stressed that his lawsuit, which was filed after the Trump administration refused a subpoena for the tax returns, is motivated by the need to conduct oversight of the administration rather than politics or the timing of the election. Neal has led a deliberative probe for the president's records, relying closely on legal counsel, although he has faced internal criticism from lawmakers for moving too slowly. This week, attorneys for the House panel asked the judge to expedite the case, but even some Neal allies are growing pessimistic. It's hard to predict. We're going to push to get the returns before the 2020 election, said Kildee, who has defended Neal and says Democrats should continue pursuing Trump's tax returns after the presidential election. They should, but will they? It's just, given the amount of time it takes for cases to move, unless the court makes a decision that these arguments are not complicated and they're going to expedite, it's going to be tough. Which, of course, every effing person in the world told you was exactly what was going to happen, and that was going to be the Trump administration's strategy to make sure it never made it to decision before the election. And you're going to have to move your ass if you are serious about this at all. And then they didn't move their asses, and so there are very few conclusions outside of realizing that they really don't care. Another House Democrat involved in oversight, who spoke on condition of anonymity to talk candidly, said of the case stretching beyond the election, "That's exactly my fear. This painstakingly slow process may prove detrimental to getting us the returns by next November." A spokesman for Neal declined to comment, but the chairman has emphasized for months that he did not want to rush, creating a sloppy case that would be thrown out of court by a federal judge. Several other Democratic lawmakers and aides on the committee, including Representative Bill Pascrell of New Jersey, defended Neal's strategy. He shouldn't. The uncertain timing of the case increases the odds that Trump will vie for re-election without divulging his personal tax returns. Can you imagine running for president twice without doing this? As presidents and presidential contenders have done since the 1970s, the leading Democratic presidential candidates have released their tax returns. And as I saw someone mention on Twitter, pithily enough the other day, Jimmy Carter is owed peanut farm reparations at this point. Trump repeatedly promised to release his returns while running for president in 2016, saying he could not do so at the time because he was under audit. That was a lie, obviously. Since his election, Trump has argued that the tax return should no longer be a matter of public concern because he won the 2016 election. The president has told advisors he will battle the issue to the Supreme Court, despite a 1924 law that explicitly gives the chair of the House Tax Writing Panel authority to receive the documents. The Trump administration has argued that the Democrats' request for Trump's tax returns amounts to an effort to embarrass him for political gain, stating that the request also raises concerns of weaponizing the Internal Revenue Service for partisan aims. The inability to secure the returns has disappointed supporters of impeachment, who have begun looking to the courts to move their investigations along after Trump stonewalled their probes. Internally, some Democrats say that if they are going to impeach the president, they have to do so before the end of the year, but think that to initiate proceedings, they need more significant findings that will move public sentiment in favor of ousting Trump. House counsel Douglas Letter told lawmakers over the summer that the tax case could take much longer than some of them anticipated, dragging into 2020. Meanwhile, there's been a realignment of sorts regarding oversight priorities, according to one official deeply involved in the investigations of the president. While Democrats thought for months that the tax return request would be met quickly and easily pave the way for oversight victories, some of them are now looking to other court cases to secure wins sooner. And of course, we read yesterday that those are delayed as well. Some Democrats, for example, say judges will soon rule in their favor upholding subpoenas for Trump's financial information by the financial services and oversight panels. They don't expect those questions to go all the way to the Supreme Court. By the way, the date on this piece that we're reading is yesterday, 3:05 p.m., but by yesterday at 3:05 p.m., we had already heard the story reported the day before that the case seeking his financial records and in the emoluments context had been delayed as well. And so I don't know whether this was outdated when it was first written. Anyway, most House Democrats defend Neal's strategy for pursuing the returns, as have several independent legal experts, but the complications have also triggered some griping about Neal, as legal experts and a handful of Democratic lawmakers have questioned his strategy for securing Trump's federal returns. Some liberal lawmakers, including Lloyd Doggett of Texas, also a member of Ways and Means, and Pramila Jayapal of Washington, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and Raul Grijalva of Arizona, have at times called for Neal to act more quickly. In July, Doggett said that the delay ensuing for the records was inexplicable and that the lawsuit for the records should have been done a long time ago. That is correct. Neal's discomfort in confronting the Trump administration has been apparent in internal meetings of the Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee, according to the House Democrat involved in oversight and an aide to a House lawmaker on the committee speaking on condition of anonymity to talk candidly without fear of professional repercussions. When discussing the subject of the tax returns, Neal frequently tells stories of bipartisan cooperation under former Ways and Means Committee leaders, particularly, this is amazing, Dan Rostenkowski of Illinois, pining for an era of political comity that others on the committee believe no longer exists, these people said. By the way, convicted felon, right? Dan Rostenkowski, pining for the days of Rostenkowski's Ways and Means Committee. Wow. You could just tell from his body language and everything else since then that he has no enthusiasm. Oh, my goodness, we got to use the word, right?
Enthusiasm.
Right, he's got none of that. No enthusiasm for dealing with the tax returns issue, said one House Democratic lawmaker who spoke on the condition of anonymity to candidly address the issue, which of course means, honestly, he's not up to the job of chairing the committee. Should have been replaced a long time ago. In an interview, committee member Pascrell said that he and Neal have not, quote, agreed on a number of decisions, and that he asked the chairman, quote, questions about the expedience and the delays I saw, unquote. But Pascrell said he's defended Neal's overall approach. The path that was chosen, according to counsel, because we thought it would be the best way to uphold the law and make sure we got the tax returns, Pascrell said. Believe me when I tell you, I've had reason to not support him, but in the overall picture, I think I am doing the right thing by backing the chairman. Well, you're not. Kildee added, I understand people's frustration, but there's a tendency to focus that frustration on the person who has the responsibility to pursue this course. But I think it's misplaced. It's not. He's done this by the book because he knows it's more important to get this right than to get it 30 days faster. The problem is he's not going to get it, period. So that's problematic. They'll end up mooting the issue before. And you know what? That would be amazing. The most amazing possible outcome here is that it goes past the election and then the courts say, well, it's moot because you only wanted it as an election issue anyway, which they would dispute and say, no, we have this oversight reason. Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to say it's the election reason instead. Goodbye. They'll be able to appeal that, but I hold this out as a possibility. Some legal experts have also questioned Neal for not yet requesting Trump's New York tax returns, which could include an unprecedented look into his business dealings and a range of other personal information. On July 8th, New York approved legislation allowing the Ways and Means Committee to request and receive Trump's state returns. For 15 days after that legislation passed, Neal could have had Trump's state returns on a direct flight from Albany to Washington, said Daniel Hamel. I'm going to give... we've talked about him before. I don't know. Actually, it's probably Hamill, but I wanted to give him the Louisiana Cajun pronunciation, although, again, it's the second time I've done this and thought, oh, it was Hymel, the Hymel pronunciation. But let's say Daniel Hamill, law professor at University of Chicago. But that window closed after Trump's personal attorneys sued New York to block the law on July 23rd. On August 1st, a federal judge ordered New York not to release those returns while the lawsuit is pending. I find actually the inclusion of this little story somewhat disingenuous. Quite honestly, if on July 8th New York approved this legislation and on July 9th Neal made this request, on July 9th in the afternoon, if not July 10th in the morning, the Trump lawyers would have been in state court blocking it just the same. So the fact that that Neal didn't request them gave them the opportunity to delay until July 23rd in filing their suit, but it just would have come sooner. I don't really think that you can fault Neal for not even asking, I guess. But quite honestly, they would have blocked the New York request as well. And it, too, would have been tied up in litigation. But the point really was that you should have started that litigation as early as possible. There was no communication over that period or during the drafting of the New York legislation between House Democrats and New York state lawmakers, according to a source who spoke on the condition of anonymity, and you know why they would do that. I don't know why I have to spend time reading that stuff out. It's a waste. There was a clear window when Congress could have taken advantage of this legislation. Not really. That is now closed, said State Senator Brad Hoylman, New York legislator who wrote the law. Their strategy around trying to obtain Trump's taxes has left a lot of state Democrats scratching their heads. They should have tried right away, but you would have been blocked. Neal has said pursuing the New York returns could undermine the House's argument in seeking the federal returns, which would provide a wider look into the president's financial dealings. That was always something to think about. The case is now filed in U.S. District Court. Regardless of the outcome on that level, it's likely to then be appealed to the D.C. Court of Appeals and from there to the Supreme Court. Each of those cases could take months. More likely than not, this will not get decided or argued until it's too late for the election, said Sandick, the former U.S. attorney. Neal has never promised to resolve the tax returns case by a certain date. He has said the committee had to be deliberate to improve its odds of securing the returns, carefully constructing a case to demonstrate it had no choice but to sue the administration. Neal has also consistently stressed he is following the advice of his lawyers, including on timing, and that his focus is on reviewing the IRS's program for auditing the president and vice president. Neal's defenders say he's focused on building a case that Democrats can win in court rather than rush unprepared into a lawsuit that gets thrown out. This is an example of some on the Democratic left being unrealistic, said former Congressman Barney Frank, a longtime colleague of Neal's. I think Neal is skeptical of gestures that make us feel good but won't go anywhere. Well, like this one isn't. And I don't feel good, and it's not going anywhere. The committee held a hearing on the tax returns issue in February. Neal requested the returns from the administration in April, then sent multiple letters with the administration that's what it says, with the administration, to the administration, I would think, before issuing subpoenas in May and a lawsuit in July. Democrats also quickly passed through the House legislation requiring the president to disclose his tax returns, but that bill died in a Republican-controlled Senate. We had no way of anticipating, can you believe this, how obstructive Trump would be in his personal capacity and as president, a senior Democratic House aide said, who should be smacked, who also spoke on condition of anonymity so that you didn't know who to smack. Trump is waging the most aggressive and expansive legal battle we've ever seen with Congress, that's true, to conceal the truth from the American people. But if you didn't know that was coming, you are a moron and must resign immediately. And that is why he requested anonymity. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add that comment in there. So, yeah, you're not getting your oversight, which is what I wrote in 2007. Didn't really need to turn this into a Nancy Pelosi bashing session, but this is the second time that she's campaigned for the speaker's job by promising that there would be vigorous oversight over a wildly corrupt Republican administration, and then having been awarded the gavel, has not delivered. Sorry. Now, it may be that her long-term plan is eventually to come around on the impeachment thing now that we've managed to rally a majority of the House Democratic caucus to that cause. But this is, again, the second time we've been through this with you. We shouldn't have to drag you. Thank you. That is the end of my anger. Or my expressed anger. Moving on. There are a couple of other very interesting stories out there, some of which require immediate attention, others of which will mix in regardless. What shall we do? How about this one? There's a very weird story that I feel like maybe we better get on top of quickly. The Epoch Times story. We haven't really discussed it. I mentioned it the other day. I feel like we've called out the Epoch Times name once or twice and said, what's up with these people? But I'm not positive that we really have. So let me go with this NBC News story here. Trump and QAnon and an impending judgment day. Ready? That's the headline again. Trump, QAnon, and an impending judgment day. Behind the Facebook-fueled rise, Facebook again, of the Epoch Times, E-P-O-C-H, Epoch Times. Started almost 2 decades ago. Did I say that correctly? Decades ago. With a stated mission to, quote, provide information to Chinese communities, China again, to help immigrants assimilate into American society. The Epoch Times now wields one of the biggest social media followings of any news outlet. That seems weird, but there's lots of Chinese people. This is the reporting of Brady Zadrozny and Ben Collins, who might pronounce it Collins, for all I know. But as an American, I'll pretend that's an easy thing to pronounce. By the numbers, there is no bigger advocate of President Donald Trump on Facebook than the Epoch Times. The small New York-based nonprofit news outlet, the New Talon News, has spent more than $1.5 million on about 11,000 pro-Trump advertisements in the last 6 months. according to data from Facebook's advertising archive, more than any organization outside of the Trump campaign itself, and more than most Democratic presidential candidates have spent on their own campaigns. How do you like that? By the way, I don't know whether part of this is whether or not they have a hard pass to the White House, but I'm just thinking back on my own efforts to get a pass to the House TV and radio gallery back in, I don't even know when we were doing it, 2000, that might have been 2007 also. The relevance of applying to the House TV and radio gallery, or the press gallery there, and the White House press operation is that you can't get a White House hard pass that allows you in every day without, rechecks on your background, etc. You can't get that without first being cleared by the House press gallery. And so it's an important step to the hard pass. And that wasn't what I was pursuing, but you can't get the hard pass without passing muster in the House gallery. And you can't I was rejected for credentials to the House gallery because I wrote for Daily Kos, and Daily Kos endorsed candidates and put links to Act Blue pages from those candidates when they were endorsed into front page posts. And that was deemed to be fundraising for candidates, even though that really wasn't what it was. But, they used that as the premise. Meanwhile, I'm curious whether they have a press pass and, are they cleared to the gallery? This Epoch Times, they are spending more money than any organization outside of the Trump campaign on pro-Trump advertisements. But that's not raising money, it's spending money. So there's in-kind contributions to him, so maybe that counts as raising money. I'm just curious how these things go. Wouldn't be surprised to see rules had changed between now and then, just pointing that out. Anyway, it's wildly inappropriate all by itself for a so-called news organization to be buying pro-Trump advertisements. These video ads, in which unidentified spokespeople thumb through a newspaper to praise Trump, peddle conspiracy theories about the deep state, and criticize fake news media. Well, they strike a familiar tone in the online conservative news ecosystem. The Epoch Times looks like many of the conservative outlets that have gained followings in recent years, but it isn't. Why not? Behind the scenes, the media outlet's ownership and operation is closely tied to Falun Gong, a Chinese spiritual community with the stated goal of taking down China's government, which by itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. But Falun Gong is a, weird organization that I think we still don't really have figured out entirely. Anyway, it's that motivation that helped drive the organization toward Trump, according to interviews with Epoch Times staffers, a move that has been both lucrative and beneficial for its message. Former practitioners of Falun Gong told NBC News that believers think the world is headed toward a judgment day. Well, that's weird. Why would a religion think that? Where those labeled communists will be sent to a kind of hell, and those sympathetic to the spiritual community will be spared. Trump is viewed as a key ally in the anti-communist fight, former Epoch Times employees said. In part because of that unusual background, the Epoch Times has had trouble finding a foothold in the broader conservative movement, even though that would seem to be in keeping with with the broader conservative movement, right? All right. Whatever. It seems like an interloper, not well integrated socially within the movement network and not terribly well circulating among right-wingers, said A.J. Bauer, a visiting professor of media, culture, and communications at New York University, who is part of an ongoing study in which he and his colleagues interview conservative journalists. Bad job, by the way. Even when discussing more fringy sites, conservative journalists tend to reference Gateway Pundit or InfoWars, Bauer said. The Epoch Times doesn't tend to come up. That seems to be changing. Before 2016, the Epoch Times generally stayed out of U.S. politics unless they dovetailed with Chinese interests. The publication's recent ad strategy, coupled with a broader campaign to embrace social media and conservative U.S. politics, Trump in particular, has doubled the Epoch Times' revenue, according to the organization's tax filings, and pushed it to greater prominence in the broader conservative media world. It sounds to me, my first inclination is to say that they just figured out that Trump was an easy mark and that they could possibly, you'd think you would do better if you could lead the President of the United States around by the nose, but how could you possibly do that from their standpoint? Well, the answer is just flatter him and pay for pro-Trump ads and it would probably work. It's a pretty good bet, honestly. We'll continue with this story in 2 minutes. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, I'm back now. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just a little bit late and distracted by something I just saw on Twitter once again. But I think a good observation on the story we just covered not that long ago, the story from Palm Beach County and the fake training they were giving to their school guards. An interesting commentary on it from Brandon Friedman, himself a veteran, pointing out one of the long-term detrimental effects of 18 years of unending war is that from school shooters to cops and random open carry nuts, American masculinity is now tied to being a commando, even though few men are capable of or interested in gaining the actual qualifications. That is an interesting observation, and I thought well worth sharing with you. And so there, I did it. You can't stop me because I'm a commando, but it's a good point. And I think it underlies a lot of the gun stories that we've read in the past couple of years. So I thought I'd pass that one on. Now, this is a very long article, this thing, about the Epoch Times. I'm not even sure we're going to get through the NBC News coverage of it. But I have a feeling that it will come up again and again and again. And it's complicated and weird. And as many things, well, it's complicated as many things regarding China are. It is also weird, and I didn't want to go forward with that sentence and say so many things related to China are weird. But there are many things related to China that are complicated and which we don't understand and which make, I'm sure, a great deal more sense to people steeped in the story. Whether it requires being steeped in the culture or not, I am not sure. But anyway, there's a lot going on in China. There's a lot of people there. It's a very difficult place to understand, not because the culture is beyond us, but because there's so many people, and there will be just as many approaches to everything. So, all right, that's a complexity that exists here in the United States, but because we live it, we understand it better. That's all. Anyway, before 2016, we found out the Epoch Times generally stayed out of U.S. politics unless they dovetailed with Chinese interests. And here, again, a part of the issue is, well, which Chinese interests? Certainly not governmental interests, but interests impacting China from, I guess, a Falun Gong standpoint. But man, okay. Well, anyway, then they figured out, if you flatter Trump or spend money on his behalf or just give him money, he'll be on your side. And Falun Gong, I guess, has been fighting an uphill battle against the Chinese communist government. And even though they might have expected a long time ago that American conservatives would be on their side because they are fighting the Chinese communist government, That wasn't enough because most Americans just simply weren't interested in China, period, unless it was squeezing money out of them or beating them up militarily or scaremongering about what they were doing. So they didn't find much in the way of allies, I guess, in that. And then they thought, oh, well, religious persecution is of great interest to Americans. They're constantly going on about that. But that, I guess, maybe they didn't realize initially that that's actually just hypocrisy. It only applies to Christians and then not really if they are brown Christians. So I guess that they were confused and stymied on that one as well. And they found out that, well, we can just bribe the president. So they started down that path. That's my guess about what's going on here. Started almost 2 decades ago as a free newspaper and website with a stated mission to, quote, provide information to Chinese communities to help immigrants assimilate into American society. I think they also thought that would be greatly appreciated by conservatives in the United States, and they found out, not really so much. You're not white, so we're not really all that interested. We say our big complaint about immigrants is that they won't assimilate. Okay, well, then we're for helping them assimilate. But you're Chinese, and we don't like that. On the other hand, Jared Kushner is fine with it because some of you will pay $500,000 to get a green card. So you're not on the S list, per se. But, working to assimilate your immigrants into American society isn't actually going to help you either. The Epoch Times now wields one of the biggest social media followings of any news outlet. I sometimes wonder how much money there could be in consulting with Chinese businesses to try and actually clear some of these things up for them, but I don't actually want to help them in their mission. But I thought maybe a more benign approach to consulting with the Chinese would be to say, when you translate the instructions for your electronic goods into English and put those in with the packages, you need to have an English speaker's eye looking over the copy and making sure that it actually works. And I would do that for you for $25 a pop or whatever. And you'd probably become quite wealthy off of that. But then you'll just find out that, oh yeah, well, they're all oligarchs and pirates making this stuff, and I'm just making them richer. So screw all of that. I don't know. There's no way to make a living in this world, and be honest about it. The podcast ain't doing it either, by the way. Started almost 2 decades ago as a free newspaper. Oh, yes, we just read this one. To provide information to Chinese communities and helping them assimilate into American society. The Epoch Times now wields one of the biggest social media followings of any news outlet. In April, at the height of its ad spending, videos from the Epoch Media Group, which includes the Epoch Times and digital video outlet New Tang Dynasty, or NTD, combined for around 3 billion views on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, ranking 11th among all video creators across platforms, and outranking every other traditional news publisher, according to data from the social media analytics company Tubular. That is amazing. I wonder whether it's genuine or whether there might not be, click farms going on somewhere and all of this. Also curious about the idea of calling your digital video outlet the New Tang Dynasty. I don't know whether that's meaningful in some way. I don't know anything about the old Tang Dynasty and what that might represent to them. I wonder if that's just a red herring or whether that's meaningful in some way. That engagement has made the Epoch Times a favorite of the Trump family and a key component of the president's re-election campaign. The president's Facebook page has posted Epoch Times content at least half a dozen times this year, with several articles written by members of the Trump campaign. Donald Trump Jr. has tweeted several of their stories, too. In May, Lara Trump, the president's daughter-in-law, sat down for a 40-minute interview in Trump Tower with the paper's senior editor. And for the first time, the Epoch Times was a main player at the conservative conference CPAC this year, where it secured interviews with members of Congress, Trump cabinet members, and right-wing celebrities. At the same time, its network of news sites and YouTube channels has made it a powerful conduit for the internet's fringier conspiracy theories, including anti-vaccination propaganda and QAnon, to reach the mainstream. Despite its growing reach and power, little is publicly known about the precise ownership, origins, or influence of the Epoch Times, which is always a good thing, right? The outlet's opacity makes it difficult to determine an overall structure, but it is loosely organized into several regional tax-free nonprofits. The Epoch Times operates alongside the video production company NTD under the umbrella of the Epoch Media Group, a private news and entertainment company whose owner executives have declined to name, citing concerns of, quote, pressure that could follow. And I guess in all this murkiness, we might wonder whether, although they may have had their origins among a protest sect, Falun Gong, and in finding themselves in conflict with the Chinese government, it may very well be that they had been infiltrated at some point, or that, who knows, for that matter, that the whole thing may be some sort of weird false flag idea, or the Chinese government might condone their continued existence just since they don't consider them an overall threat, maybe to see what sort of foreign allies they draw out of the woodwork so that they can monitor our monitoring of the Chinese. There's many iterations that this could take on. All right, let's see. The Epoch Media Group, along with Shen Yun. This is an interesting combination. Shen Yun, you might actually recognize. Shen Yun is a dance troupe known for its ubiquitous advertising and unsettling performances. And together, the Epoch Media Group and Shen Yun make up the outreach effort of Falun Gong, a relatively new spiritual practice that combines ancient Chinese meditative exercises, I wonder if it's from the Tang Dynasty, mysticism, and often ultra-conservative cultural worldviews. Falun Gong's founder has referred to Epoch Media Group as our media, and the group's practice heavily informs the Epoch Times' coverage, according to former employees who spoke with NBC News. And it comes to mind here the Unification Church and the Reverend Moon and their deal, and the fact that, I mean, consider how weird it is that they always owned, or how weird it was that they owned the Washington Times. And I guess that's a parallel to keep in mind. Shen Yun and the relationship there, I found interesting. I've never gone to any of its performances. I can't tell you whether they're unsettling or not. But their advertising is ubiquitous. I mean, I see it all over the place. It may be that it's most often in Chinese restaurants, but I do see advertising here and online all over the place. I know what they mean by ubiquitous. And I never would have thought to connect the two, which is probably their idea. Executives at the Epoch Times declined to be interviewed for this article, but the publisher, Stephen Gregory, wrote an editorial in response to a list of emailed questions from NBC News, calling it highly inappropriate and part of an effort to discredit the publication, to ask about the company's affiliation with Falun Gong and its stance on the Trump administration. Interviews with former employees, public financial records, and social media data illustrate how a secretive newspaper has been able to leverage the devoted followers of a reclusive spiritual leader, political vitriol, online conspiracy theories, and the rise of Trump to become a digital media powerhouse that now attracts billions of views each month, all while publicly denying or downplaying its association with Falun Gong. Next section here, titled Behind the Times. In 2009, the founder and leader of Falun Gong, Li Hongzhi, came to speak at the Epoch Times offices in Manhattan. Li came with a clear directive for the Falun Gong volunteers who comprised the company's staff: become regular media. Become Talon Media, even. The publication had been founded 9 years earlier in Georgia by John Tang. New Tang Dynasty? That's the answer. I mean, I said that and said, oh, well, maybe they're referring to an old Tang Dynasty. Maybe there was no Tang Dynasty at all. I don't know enough Chinese history to know whether that is a joke or a real reference to an actual dynasty, or just playing off of the name Dynasty because John Tang owns it. I got no idea. I would research that, but I'm in the middle of a show. So anyway, he's a Chinese-American practitioner of Falun Gong and current president of New Tang Dynasty, but it was falling short of Li's ambitions, as stated to his followers, to expose the evil of the Chinese government and, quote, save all sentient beings, unquote, in a forthcoming divine battle against communism. Roughly translated by the group as law wheel exercise. Law wheel exercise. Falun Gong was started by Li in 1992. Really? Okay, so Falun Gong supposedly, roughly translated, means law wheel exercise, which means nothing to me. The practice, which combines bits of Buddhism and Taoism, involves meditation and gentle exercises, and espouses Li's controversial teachings. Li Hongzhi simplified meditation and practices that traditionally have many steps and are very confusing, said Ming Xia, a professor at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, who has studied Falun Gong. Basically, it's like fast food, a quickie. That's not really what follows from fast food, but okay. Li's teachings quickly built a significant following and ran into tension with China's leaders who viewed his popularity as a threat to the communist government's hold on power. In 1999, after thousands of Li's followers gathered in front of President Jiang Zemin's compound to quietly protest the arrest of several Falun Gong members, authorities in China banned Falun Gong, closing teaching centers and arresting Falun Gong organizers and practitioners who refused to give up the practice. Human rights groups have reported some adherents being tortured and killed while in custody. Well, that'll get you in opposition to the government. The crackdown elicited condemnation from Western countries and attracted a new pool of followers in the United States for whom China and communism were common adversaries. The persecution itself elevated Li's status and brought tremendous media attention, Ming said. It has also invited scrutiny of the spiritual leader's more unconventional ideas. Among them, Li has railed against what he called the wickedness of homosexuality, that's problematic, also feminism and popular music, while holding that he is a godlike figure who can levitate and walk through walls. Trump should put him on the ticket, basically. Li has also taught that sickness is a symptom of evil that can only be truly cured with meditation and devotion, and that aliens from undiscovered dimensions have invaded the minds and bodies of humans, bringing corruption and inventions such as computers and airplanes. Okay. The Chinese government has used these controversial teachings to label Falun Gong a cult. Falun Gong has denied the government's characterization, and who knows who to believe in a fight between the Chinese Communist government and some other people. Yeah, how can you tell, which ones are the weirdos in all of this? And their strange views parallel the strange views of plenty of American-based weirdos, too. The Epoch Times provided Li with an English-language way to push back against China, a position that would eventually dovetail with Trump's election. In 2005, the Epoch Times released its greatest salvo, publishing the 9 Commentaries, a widely distributed book-length series of anonymous editorials that it claimed exposed the Chinese Communist Party's massive crimes and attempts to eradicate all traditional morality and religious belief, which is not hard to believe about the Chinese Communist Party. The next year, an Epoch Times reporter was removed from a White House event for Chinese President Hu Jintao after interrupting the ceremony by shouting for several minutes that then-President George W. Bush must stop the leader from, quote, persecuting Falun Gong. But despite its small army of devoted volunteers, the Epoch Times was still operating as a fledgling startup. Ben Hurley is a former Falun Gong practitioner who helped create Australia's English version of the Epoch Times out of a living room in Sydney in 2005. He has written about his experience with the paper and described the early years as, quote, a giant PR campaign to evangelize about Falun Gong's belief in an upcoming apocalypse in which those who think badly of the practice or well of the Chinese Communist Party will be destroyed. Hurley, who wrote for the Epoch Times until he left in 2013, said he saw practitioners in leadership positions begin drawing harder and harder lines about acceptable political positions. Now, before I continue on with this, I do want to make note of the fact that I had, alongside this article, when it came out, other people were tweeting about it and tweeting about this other weird, unexplained incident inside the White House involving Epoch Times reporters. This from a Washington Post piece from September 18th, 2018, by David Nakamura, entitled White House Reviews Incident Involving Epoch Times Photographer Handing a Folder to Trump. Just to kind of quickly give you what happened here. The White House has reviewed an incident last week in which a news photographer for the Epoch Times, you know all about them, the photographer, identified by other photojournalists as Samira Boau, is my best attempt at the last name here, Bouaou, passed the purple-colored folder to Trump as he was walking out of the East Room on September 12th after delivering remarks at a reception for the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. Boau, maybe, was lined up with other photographers in an area reserved for journalists when she entered a restricted pathway where the president was walking. According to several news photographers who witnessed the incident, Trump accepted the folder and appeared to open it briefly as he departed before quickly shutting it, the witnesses said. It was not clear what was inside the folder. Photographers who asked this photographer, Boau, afterward why she did it and what the folder contained said she declined to provide details. So apparently we never really got an explanation of what that was all about. But that came up in the context of this NBC News story about the Epoch Times. So I just wanted to throw that in there along with the other weird interruption event. Now back to the article, the NBC News article. There, where do we leave off? Oh, yes, right. Ben Hurley said that he saw leadership people drawing harder and harder lines about acceptable political positions. Their views were always anti-abortion and homophobic, but there was more room for disagreement in the early days, he said. Hurley said Falun Gong practitioners saw communism everywhere. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, movie star Jackie Chan, and former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan were all considered to have sold themselves out to the Chinese government, Hurley said. Okay. This kind of coverage foreshadowed the news organization's embrace of conspiracy theories like QAnon, the overarching theory that there is an evil cabal of deep state operators and child predators out to take down the president. It is so rabidly pro-Trump, Hurley said, referring to the Epoch Times. Devout practitioners of Falun Gong believe that Trump was sent by heaven to destroy the Communist Party. And you know what? American Christians believe the same. Or so some of them do anyhow. Or so they would have you believe. A representative for Lee declined an interview request. Lee lives among hundreds of his followers near Dragon Springs, a 400-acre compound in upstate New York that houses temples, private schools, and quarters where performers for the organization's dance troupe, Shen Yun, live and rehearse, according to 4 former compound residents and former Falun Gong practitioners who spoke to NBC News. They said that life in Dragon Springs is tightly controlled by Lee, that internet access is restricted, the uses of medicines is discouraged, and arranged relationships are common. 2 former residents on visas said they were offered to be set up with U.S. residents at the compound. What do you know? Tiger Huang, a former Dragon Springs resident who was on a U.S. student visa from Taiwan, said she was set up on 3 dates on the compound and she believed her ability to stay in the U.S. was tied to the arrangement. Oh no, an immigration scam, but being perpetrated by rabidly pro-Trump foreigners. Of course, that will get almost zero attention from the authorities. The purpose of setting up these dates was obvious, Huang said. Her now husband, a former Dragon Springs resident, confirmed the account. Huang said she was told by Dragon Springs officials her visa had expired and was told to go back to Taiwan after months of dating a non-practitioner in the compound. Really? What's a non-practitioner doing in the compound? She later learned that her visa had not expired when she was told to leave the country. How odd. Next up, campaign season. We'll see if we can get through one more section before closing things out for the weekend. By 2016, the Epoch Times group appeared to have heeded the call from Lee to run its operation more like a typical news organization, like Talon News, starting with the Epoch Times website. Okay. That's odd. I have a weird message from Skype that I think I will have to ignore until I can pay better attention to it. Okay, where were we? In March, the company placed job ads on the site Indeed.com and assembled a team of 7 young reporters otherwise unconnected to Falun Gong. The average salary for the new recruits was $35,000 a year, paid monthly, according to former employees. Things seemed, quote, strange, even from the first day, according to 5 former reporters who spoke with NBC News, 4 of whom asked for an anonymity over concerns, well, you know why. As part of their orientation, new reporters watched a video that laid out the Chinese persecution of Falun Gong followers. The publisher, Stephen Gregory, also spoke to the reporters about his vision for the new digital initiative. The former employees said Gregory's talk framed the Epoch Times as an answer to the liberal mainstream media. Again, another person on that task, huh? Their content was to be critical of communist China, clear-eyed about the threat of Islamic terrorism, interestingly enough, focused on illegal immigration, and at all times rooted in traditional values, they said. This meant no content about drugs, gay people, or popular music. The reporters said they worked from desks arranged in a U-shape in a single-room office that was separated by a locked door from the other staff members who worked on the paper. Dozens of Falun Gong volunteers and interns. The new recruits wrote up to 5 news stories a day in an effort to meet a quota of 100,000 page views and submitted their work to a handful of editors, a team of 2 Falun Gong practicing married couples. 4 people, presumably, unless Falun Gong recognizes multiple party marriages, let's say. Slave labor might not be the right word, but a lot of articles, that's a lot to write in one day, one former employee said. It wasn't just the amount of writing, but also the conservative editorial restrictions that began to concern some of the employees. It's like we were supposed to be fighting so-called liberal propaganda by making our own, said Steve Klett, who covered the Trump campaign for the Epoch Times as his first job in journalism. Klett likened the Epoch Times to a Russian troll farm and said his articles were edited to remove outside criticism of Trump. The worst was the Pulse shooting, Klett said, referring to the 2016 mass shooting in which 50 people, including the gunman, were killed at a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. We weren't allowed to cover stories involving homosexuality, but that bumps up against them wanting to cover Islamic terrorism, so I wrote 4 articles without using the word gay. Klett said that the publication also began to skew in favor of Trump, who had targeted China on the campaign trail with talk of a trade war. I knew I had to forget about the worst parts of Trump, Klett said. Klett, however, would not end up having to cover the Trump administration. 8 days before the election, the team was called together and fired as a group. I guess the experiment was over, a former employee said. How odd. We'll have to leave it there, I think, in terms of getting through the rest. Although we're actually pretty close to the end. There's only one more section. It is entitled The Content. Maybe we can read one more paragraph before exiting here. The Epoch Times, digital production company NTD, and the heavily advertised dance troupe Shenyun make up the non-profit network that Lee calls Our Media. Financial documents paint a complicated picture of more than a dozen technically separate organizations that appear to share missions, money, and executives. Though the source of their revenue is unclear, the most recent financial records from each organization paint a picture of an overall business thriving in the Trump era. And I guess they know how to do it. The Epoch Times brought in $8.1 million in revenue in 2017, double what it had in the previous year, and reported spending $7.2 million on printing newspaper and creating web and media programs. That's in a quote there, okay? Most of its revenue comes from advertising and web and media income, according to the group's annual tax filings, while individual donations and subscriptions to the paper make up less than 10% of its revenue. New Tang Dynasty's 2017 revenue, according to the IRS, $18 million, a 150% increase over the year before, and it spent $16.2 million. That's some big-time growth, and this notes here that its enthusiastic support for Trump's agenda and the exposure of what the publication claims is a giant global conspiracy led by Clinton and former President Barack Obama to tear down Trump. One such conspiracy theory, loosely called Spygate, has become a common talking point of Fox News host Sean Hannity and conservative news websites like Breitbart. So there's a lot of overlap in the content and the nature of it as well, and just something to keep an eye on, I think, as we head into the weekend. Now time, of course, to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And I think the pop-up I've got from Skype is standing in the way of my telling you what's coming up next, but believe me, it's
Daily
great.
Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, here we go. Let's pick this one up. Hey, let's go to the international section here. FIFA is already setting up the 2023 Women's World Cup for failure. We'll find out how. And Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland said Canada's position on Russia's participation in the G7 is very clear. They're opposed. How strange.